The Cuban Revolution was a watershed moment in Latin American history. It toppled a dictator and promised social justice. It inspired hope and fear in equal measure. The revolution's impact transcended Cuba's shores. It reverberated throughout Latin America and the world. The year 1959 marked the dawn of a new era. The revolution's success sent shockwaves through the halls of power. It emboldened leftist movements across the region. The prospect of another Cuba loomed large in the minds of US policymakers. The Cuban Revolution became a focal point of the Cold War. It brought the world to the brink of nuclear annihilation during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The revolution's legacy remains complex and contested. Its supporters hail it as a triumph over imperialism and oppression. They point to its achievements in healthcare, education and social welfare. Its detractors condemn its authoritarianism and human rights violations. They criticize its economic mismanagement and suppression of dissent. This essay will explore the key events and figures of the Cuban Revolution. It will analyze its causes, consequences, and enduring significance. From the assault on Moncada barracks to the triumph of Fidel Castro, the Cuban Revolution continues to shape our understanding of revolution, ideology, and power in the 20th century. In the years leading up to the revolution, Cuba presented a paradox. The island boasted a vibrant culture and a relatively high standard of living for Latin America. Yet, beneath the surface, simmered discontent. The Cuban economy, heavily reliant on sugar exports, was vulnerable to fluctuations in the global market. This dependence on a single crop left the majority of Cubans at the mercy of international forces beyond their control. Fulgencio Batista, a former soldier who had seized power in a coup in 1952, ruled Cuba with an iron fist. His regime, backed by the United States, was riddled with corruption and brutality. Political opponents were silenced, often through violence and intimidation. The gap between the wealthy elite and the impoverished masses widened. The United States, with its economic and political might, held considerable sway over Cuba. American corporations controlled vast swathes of the island's economy, from sugar plantations to casinos. This neo-colonial relationship fueled resentment among Cubans who saw their country's resources exploited for foreign profit. Batista's repression and dependence on the US created a fertile ground for revolution. A young lawyer named Fidel Castro would emerge from this climate of discontent to challenge the existing order. Castro's charisma, combined with the widespread yearning for change, would ignite a firestorm that would consume Cuba and reverberate throughout the world. On July 26, 1953, a group of young revolutionaries, led by Fidel Castro, launched a daring attack on the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba. Their goal was to capture the second-largest military garrison in the country. They aimed to seize weapons and spark a popular uprising against the Batista regime. The attack, meticulously planned but poorly executed, ended in disaster. Outnumbered and outgunned, the rebels were quickly overwhelmed by Batista's forces. Many were killed in the fighting. Others, including Fidel and his brother Raúl, were captured. The failure of the Moncada assault proved to be a turning point for the Cuban Revolution. Though a tactical defeat, it would transform Castro into a national figure. The trial of the captured rebels provided Castro with a platform to articulate his revolutionary vision. His now famous "History Will Absolve Me" speech, delivered from the courtroom, outlined his indictment of the Batista regime and his aspirations for a just and independent Cuba. The speech, later transcribed and smuggled out of prison, became a manifesto for the burgeoning revolutionary movement. Despite the setback at Moncada, the spirit of rebellion remained alive. The attack had exposed the vulnerability of Batista's regime and the depth of popular discontent. It set in motion a chain of events that would culminate in the triumph of the revolution 5 years later. Imprisoned after the Moncada attack, Fidel Castro and his comrades were released in 1955 under a general amnesty. The government, facing mounting pressure, hoped to appease public opinion by freeing the charismatic leader. However, Batista's gesture backfired spectacularly. Castro, far from being silenced, used his newfound freedom to regroup and re-strategize. He traveled to Mexico, where he established a new revolutionary organization, the 26th of July movement, named after the date of the Moncada assault. In Mexico, Castro gathered a core group of dedicated revolutionaries, including his brother Raúl and the Argentine doctor Ernesto Che Guevara. They trained rigorously, honing their military skills and developing their revolutionary theory. The Mexican exile provided Castro with the opportunity to forge alliances with other disaffected Cubans and garner support from sympathetic international actors. It was during this period that Castro solidified his commitment to armed struggle as the means to overthrow Batista. He recognized that the Cuban people, though yearning for change, were unlikely to rise up spontaneously. A disciplined and well-organized guerrilla force operating from the island's rugged mountains could provide the catalyst for a broader popular uprising. The stage was set for the next phase of the Cuban Revolution, a daring return to the island that would ignite a nationwide struggle for liberation.